COP29, a turning point for climate action. The world holds its breath. We are at a crossroads. COP29, the annual UN Climate Change Conference, is underway. This year, the stakes are higher than ever. Our planet is heating up, with increasingly devastating consequences. COP29 is a platform for nations to come together. We must forge a path toward a cooler, more sustainable future. The time for talk is over. We need concrete action. The science is clear. We are running out of time. The latest IPCC report paints a stark picture. We are on course for catastrophic warming if we don't drastically cut emissions. This means phasing out fossil fuels and transitioning to renewable energy sources. It also means investing in climate adaptation and resilience measures. The decisions made at COP29 will have far-reaching implications for generations to come. The hope is that world leaders understand the urgency. They must move beyond political posturing and short-term interests. We need bold commitments and collaborative action. The future of our planet and our species depends on it. The world is watching, waiting, and hoping for real progress. Let's make COP29 the turning point where we finally change course. All eyes are on the United States. The recent election has cast a long shadow over COP29. The outcome will undoubtedly impact global climate efforts for better or for worse. The U.S. is the world's second-largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Its role in international climate negotiations is crucial. A proactive and committed U.S. administration can galvanize global action. Conversely, inaction or backsliding by the U.S. could have devastating consequences. The new administration faces a choice: embrace climate action or obstruct progress. The world is watching to see what path the U.S. will choose. Will it uphold its commitments under the Paris Agreement? Will it invest in clean energy and climate resilience? The answers to these questions are critical. They will determine the trajectory of global climate action for years to come. The international community hopes for a renewed commitment from the U.S. A strong stance from the U.S. can encourage other nations to step up their own efforts. It can also unlock much-needed climate finance for developing countries. The world needs the U.S. to be a leader in the fight against climate change. The time for decisive action is now. The U.K. has positioned itself as a climate leader. It has pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve this, the UK is implementing a range of ambitious policies. These include phasing out coal-fired power plants, investing in renewable energy, and promoting energy efficiency. The UK is also advocating for ambitious climate action on the global stage. The UK's commitment to climate action is commendable. Its actions demonstrate that a transition to a low-carbon economy is possible. The UK's leadership is particularly significant given its historical role as a major emitter. By taking bold action at home, the UK is setting an example for other developed nations to follow. However, the UK's climate policies have not been without criticism. Some argue that the government is not doing enough to meet its climate targets. Others criticize the government's continued support for fossil fuel extraction. Despite these criticisms, the UK's commitment to climate action remains strong. The UK's actions on climate change are being closely watched by the rest of the world. Its success or failure in achieving its climate goals will have significant implications for global climate efforts. The world needs the UK to continue to lead by example and to push for ambitious climate action from other nations. Climate finance is a critical issue at COP29. Developing countries need financial assistance to transition to clean energy and adapt to climate impacts. Developed nations pledge to provide $100 billion per year in climate finance by 2020. However, this target has not been met. The shortfall in climate finance is a major obstacle to progress in international climate negotiations. Developing countries are on the front lines of climate change. They are disproportionately vulnerable to climate impacts, such as sea level rise, droughts, and floods. Yet, they often lack the resources to adapt to these changes. Climate finance is essential for helping developing countries build resilience to climate change. It is also crucial for enabling them to pursue low-carbon development pathways. The failure of developed nations to deliver on their climate finance commitments has eroded trust in the negotiations. Developing countries are calling for increased financial support, as well as for greater transparency and accountability in the way that climate finance is provided and used. Scaling up climate finance is essential for achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. It is also a matter of climate justice. Developed nations have a moral obligation to support developing countries in their efforts to address climate change. COP29 must deliver on climate finance. Section 5. Carbon markets. A tool for change or a greenwashing tactic? Carbon markets are a key topic of discussion at COP29. The Paris Agreement establishes a framework for international carbon markets. The idea is to create a system where countries can trade carbon credits to help them meet their emission reduction targets. However, there are concerns about the effectiveness and integrity of carbon markets. Proponents of carbon markets argue that they can help to reduce emissions at a lower cost. They argue that carbon markets can create financial incentives for companies and countries to invest in clean technologies. However, critics argue that carbon markets are prone to loopholes and accounting errors. They also argue that carbon markets allow polluters to continue emitting greenhouse gases without making real reductions. One of the key challenges is to ensure that carbon markets are actually leading to real and verifiable emissions reductions. This requires robust accounting rules and strong enforcement mechanisms. Another challenge is to ensure that carbon markets are equitable and benefit both developed and developing countries. The negotiations at COP29 will focus on developing the rules and guidelines for international carbon markets. These rules will determine whether carbon markets can become an effective tool for combating climate change or whether they will simply serve as a greenwashing mechanism for polluters. Section 6. Beyond governments. Businesses on the front line. While governments negotiate, the private sector is increasingly recognized as a vital player in combating climate change. Businesses are stepping up and taking action. They are setting ambitious emission reduction targets, investing in renewable energy, and developing innovative climate solutions. Leading companies are integrating sustainability into their business models. They are recognizing that climate action is not just a moral imperative, but also a business opportunity. Investors are increasingly demanding that companies disclose their climate risks and demonstrate their commitment to sustainability. Consumers are also playing a role in driving corporate climate action. They are increasingly choosing products and services from companies with strong environmental records. This consumer pressure is sending a clear signal to businesses that sustainability is no longer optional, it is essential. Section 7. The People's Climate Movement, a force to be reckoned with. Outside the negotiating halls, a powerful force is making its voice heard, the People's Climate Movement. Millions of people around the world are demanding urgent climate action. From school strikes to mass protests, people are taking to the streets to express their anger and frustration with the lack of progress from governments and corporations. The climate movement is diverse and intersectional. It is led by young people, indigenous communities, and frontline communities who are already experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change. The movement is demanding a just and equitable transition to a clean energy future. They are calling for an end to fossil fuel subsidies and for investments in renewable energy and climate justice. The People's Climate Movement is a powerful force for change. It is putting pressure on governments and corporations to take bold action on climate change. The movement is also raising awareness about the urgency of the climate crisis and the need for systemic change. Section 8. Navigating the challenges roadblocks on the path to a cooler planet. Despite the growing momentum for climate action, there are still significant challenges to overcome. One of the biggest challenges is the lack of political will. Many governments are reluctant to make the necessary commitments to reduce emissions. This is often due to pressure from powerful fossil fuel interests. Another challenge is the lack of urgency. Climate change is often seen as a long-term problem, which makes it difficult to mobilize action in the present. However, the impacts of climate change are already being felt around the world. The longer we wait to act, the more severe these impacts will become. Financing the transition to a low-carbon economy is another major challenge. Developing countries in particular need financial support to make this transition. Finally, there is the challenge of overcoming inertia. We are locked into systems and ways of life that are highly carbon-intensive. Breaking free from these systems and creating a truly sustainable future will require a profound shift in our values and behaviors. Section 9. The Road Ahead: Collective Action for a Sustainable Future. COP29 is a critical moment in the fight against climate change. The decisions made here will have far-reaching consequences. We need to see real progress on a number of fronts. This includes ambitious emission reduction targets, increased climate finance, and robust rules for carbon markets. The world is watching, and the stakes are high. The time for incrementalism is over. We need bold, transformative action to avert the worst impacts of climate change. The road ahead will be challenging, but it is not insurmountable. We have the technology, the resources, and the ingenuity to solve this crisis. What we need now is the political will and the collective action to make it happen.